Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech and iOS 16.6 RC or release candidate released today to developers and public beta testers. This is available on all iOS 16 supported devices and releases at the same time everywhere around the world if you're a developer or beta tester. It's available for the iPhone 8, 8 Plus, iPhone 10, all the way up to the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max. And this came in at a very large 5.49 gigabytes. That's because anytime you go from a beta to a final version, which the release candidate is, this should be the version released to the public if there's no additional issues, you're going to have a full install. It was about the same size on all the devices we have here and was released alongside a lot of different updates, such as iPadOS 16.6 RC, watchOS 9.6 RC, macOS 13.5 RC, tvOS and HomePod OS 16.6 RC, and also older iOS and macOS versions as well. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the build number and talk about what's new. So we'll go to Settings, then General, then About. You can see the build number is 20G75. This particular build went through 5 different betas, and as far as new features, well, if we go to the photo here where we have iOS 16.6, it says this update provides important bug fixes and security updates and is recommended for all users. Now, this is the first time in a very long time we've had a major release with no listed updates. So originally in beta 1, we had contact key verification, and if we go back and actually search for that, that's actually something that was shown back in December, you'll see that there's no mention of contact key verification. If we go into settings, you'll see here we have contact key verification for iMessage, which will help you verify that you're actually texting the person that you actually think you are. So that's something we were promised with that. It looks like they're just making a big push to push this to iOS 17. Also, we had mentions of different things such as two-factor authentication requirements for home, as well as Siri education and Apple Cash and Savings accounts mentioned within previous codes in previous iOS 16.6 betas. However, this time around, we're not seeing anything as far as anything new with features. This is a bit odd as we just haven't seen anything with a major release showing nothing at all. And as I mentioned, with changes in the code, my friend Steve Mosier posted some of those changes on Twitter last time with the previous betas, with beta 3 adding support for the latest Macs, so MacBook Air, Mac Studio, and Mac Pro when seeing them on a network. Additionally, there's other changes with Apple Wallet, so lots of little changes here and there, little wording changes, but nothing major this time around. Now, Apple did release a couple other things I wanted to mention today as well. Final Cut Pro was updated to version 10.6.7 along with motion and compressor updates and fixes. So we got some major app updates, but that's about it. And also, if you're not using Twitter or Instagram and instead are using Threads, that was updated today as well with a new follow tab and more. So I'm on Threads as well as Twitter and many others. Those are linked in the description. Now, as far as camera improvements, well, it doesn't look like we're seeing many camera improvements. That's being pushed to iOS 17, as is everything else. Taking a photo here in macro, which it just switched to, if we jump out of macro, it seems to be pretty good overall. Actually, that was quite blurry. Let's see if we can get that in focus here. There we go. We'll take a photo and you'll see it looks pretty good. It's still a bit sharp. I think they fixed this a lot in iOS 17, but there's no specific fixes. As far as issues that they've resolved, as far as bugs, Apple has not said what they've resolved, but they definitely have not fixed the issue with notifications yet. It's still glitchy, and I cleared them off this phone, but it's the same thing that you experience on iOS 16.5.1 and iOS 17. I'm not sure why they haven't fixed it yet, but it's still an issue where they just sort of aren't smooth at all. Hopefully they fix it in iOS 17. As far as anything else, they haven't said specifically what they've fixed. I found no obvious corrections to any bugs that we had. As far as release notes, well, if we go into those, Apple hasn't provided any with iOS 16.6 RC. They had them with Beta 5. They just have the summer 2023 newsletter about the Apple Beta software program. When it comes to security updates, we'll know more about that when it releases to the public, but on Apple's security website, currently we have the rapid security response updates with iOS 16.5.1c. So Apple will update this page with iOS 16.6 when it's released to the public, but we don't know what's in it until then. So there's really not a whole lot in iOS 16.6 that we know about. Maybe there's some major security updates, but it's a bit disappointing that they're just not more transparent as to what they've fixed this time around. As far as overall performance, while iOS 16.6 has been extremely fast, super smooth, and just really nice to use. Most people say it's very stable, and maybe that's what they're focusing on with iOS 16.6. The same is true on the iPad. It's decent performance, it's staying nice and cool. This is basically the same temperature everywhere across the back. It's super cool to the touch, even after installing such a major update. Battery life is actually pretty good on iOS 16.6. Most people throughout the betas reported pretty great battery life, and thanks to Nate for sending in his battery life as he's been using it full time. You'll see here 3 hours and 17 minutes of screen active time, and he only used 25% of his battery today. It wiped out the previous days as he probably installing the update. Sometimes that actually happens, but you'll see only 25% of the battery was used, and yesterday 6 hours and 40 minutes of screen active time and not even 75% of the battery. So I would say this is pretty great battery life overall on a 14 Pro Max, 12 hours or so if he was to use it full time. Now, if you're wondering if you should install iOS 16.6 RC, well, if you're not using iOS 17 betas and you want to bump up to the next version, you definitely could do that. However, you're not really going to notice many changes, maybe other than better performance or smoother performance and better battery life. But you could do that, and then we'll get the public release probably Monday. So most likely we'll see it Monday. That's what Apple typically does. We could see it before then, but usually that's what happens. So we'll wait and see what happens there. As far as the next release, well, next week we could also get iOS 16.7 Beta 1 along with iOS 17 Beta 4. So we'll see iOS 16.7 Beta 1 most likely sometime next week. And last week, iOS 16 Beta 4 released on the 27th. So I would expect a similar release schedule with iOS 17 betas. We could see it this week, but based on what they did last year, since they're following that, I would expect it next week. As far as overall benchmarks, I did run those, so let's take a look. We'll go into Geekbench 6, and you can see them here. Now, I airdropped last week's benchmarks over to this phone so we could compare it more easily. And you'll see today's scores with iOS 16.6 RC. We have 2,558 for single core, compared to 2,562 on the previous update. Then with multi-core, 6,616 compared to 6,692. Very similar results. If I reran this on today's update, we'd probably have better results. These are close enough that it's performing the same, which is good since Beta 5 has been great. Now, iOS 16.6 RC seems to be pretty good and stable overall. It'll take a few days to know what battery life is like for sure and overall performance as it sort of computes things in the background and then is just used regularly. Let me know your experience, and if you found anything else, though, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. If you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, it will be linked in the description as it normally is. If you haven't subscribed already, though, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.